a beautiful night in the hood. It's a beautiful night in the hood. Gonna be hanging out in the hood.
Hi, welcome to Almost Cooperstown. I'm Mark, and this is Gordon, and we love talking about baseball.
So I think one of the more interesting things about baseball is that unlike it's one of the sports that we've seen the most crossover between it and other professional sports, where guys have been capable of playing baseball at a high level and guys have been capable of playing other sports at a high level, which I think makes it actually relatively unusual because it's like you don't see a lot of guys trying to cross over between any of the other three major ones, basketball, hockey, and football, partially just due to scheduling conflict. Like, I don't think you could play football and basketball because both of those sports are ongoing at the same time. But I think also there's just something about baseball that lends itself because it's a low impact game. There's no impact on your body nearly to the same degree that you would have in basketball, let alone football or hockey. So I think I think it is very interesting that in comparison to a lot of different sports that you can really play baseball and play another sport, professionally, do both.
Lower impact would probably be a better way of saying it, because low impact, baseball players will tell you playing 162 games or however many, most of them play close to that, is debilitating, right? There's no other sport that has, half those games. So give the guys credit, for that.
Right. It's just in comparison, the physical.
Right. There's not physical. You're not running into other people like in football, and basketball is a different kind of physicality, and hockey obviously kind of has a bit of both if you look at it that way. Mm-hmm. But originally, I think when players played both sports, more than one sport than baseball, and we'll talk about that, probably it was as much financial, right, as anything else, because they didn't make enough money playing baseball and they had to, find other ways to make money. And for those that could, playing another sport was better than getting a regular job.
Oh, certainly. And I think also, and then it also became kind of a status thing, that you were talented enough to do both. That kind of set you apart from all your peers. Now, the thing is there's only one guy that's ever been an all-star at both.
Right. I don't know about you, but I kind of I have the big four that I consider to be, four baseball players who had enough success in other sport or sports that say, these are sort of held above everybody else because they kind of did it at least the major league level in both sports.
And I will say that there was one guy that I think probably could have. There's a few guys that could have. They just chose to go that way. And so they chose to stick with one particular sport. Because I think there's a few guys that could have actually been an impressive player.
Yeah, and definitely. Look, there's a guy playing football right now for the Arizona Cardinals who, Kyler Murray and Russell Wilson was a pretty darn good baseball player, and those guys chose football. I think it's pretty clear they made the right choice for them and their teams.
Both of them are pretty good.
Exactly. But talented enough, and nobody has played professional baseball and any other sport. I believe. I think Brian Jordan did it after Deion Sanders, but I can't remember.
I don't think anybody's done it since then.
Right. So who is your clear-cut number one?
It's kind of easy. It's Bo Jackson.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. And you didn't obviously get to see him play, but there was that year, I think it was 1989, where Bo Jackson, was an all-star and had an amazing all-star game. He also, I think, hit 32 homers that year. Mm-hmm. And so, and for a very good Royals team, by the way, that finished second in the AL West in those days to the Oakland A's that ended up going to the World Series and playing the Giants. So that was the McGuire and Canseco Bash Boys that Bo Jackson team finished at 92 and 70. And Bo Jackson was the star, one of the stars of that team, certainly offensively. He also played football that year for the Raiders. And I was surprised at how little football he really did play, because you remember some of the great plays you'd see. And I guess we were just also amazed that he was a baseball player and football player, that anything he did was magnified in either sport.
Kind of like Ohtani in a sense. He's like, anything he does is magnified because he's both pitching and hitting.
But Bo Jackson was
playing the field. Right.
It was a spectacular athletic, talent. Specimen, if I can say that. He just looks so put together and so strong and so in control of his body and his faculties, and a very smart player as well, understood, the nuances of both games in a way that I don't think he got credit for enough.
No, and his body just didn't hold up. He was not able due to injury because that's the thing. He was the only guy to ever be a Pro Bowler and an MLB All-Star.
That's pretty cool.
That's pretty cool. You don't do that by accident. And it's just the question for him is always what could have been.
Right. Now, I think we would both agree he is far from being an all-time great in baseball, which he had more success, I guess, and had a longer career. But I think he played 10 years of either. Yeah,
no, he didn't play 10 years of either. So that's why he's the ultimate what-if story in some respects.
Yeah. But a spectacular athlete. And then it makes me wonder, right? Who else is on your list there? We talked about a couple of them.
Well, we talked about obviously prime time.
Yeah.
And Deion Sanders. And I think with Deion, he was so good at football that it always felt like baseball was kind of just like a side hustle for him.
I'm really glad you said that, right? Because I did you even get to see him play? I can't even remember.
I did. But I vaguely remember him playing for the Cincinnati Reds. Did he play for
the Yankees? I remember too. He played,
and I remember there was one year he had that was actually like a pretty good season. Like he was, but
186 career stolen bases. I think that would be the thing I would have him, at a time when people stole bases more than they do.
Right. But it was just like he was never the baseball player that he was the football player.
No, he was not, but no, not even close. And I think you're right. He kind of was. Masquerading is the wrong term, right? Because he was a football player first and a baseball player second. That I think you can say.
Yeah, that I think you can say. I would say Michael Jordan playing in the minors felt much more like masquerading than what Deion Sanders was doing.
Let's hold off talking about that because I don't even think we had planned to talk about it as part of this, but I do. And again, having seen the stuff for those that haven't, when I watched Deion Sanders play, he was a nice baseball player, and you kept thinking, don't they have anybody else that could play on the Yankees when he was good in the Yankees? I mean, he had 56 steals one year, but as a football player, he was so electric and do so many things. Like, why are you even messing with it? Because he could.
Right, because he had the capital to be able to mess with it, and he was like, I want to do this, I'm going to do it, and he was just talented enough.
And positionally, right? Think about it. He played a position of all the positions on the football field that isn't a punter or a kicker. Let's be fair. Playing defensive back, and Deion Sanders was notably shy on tackling, was not the greatest because he knew to preserve his body, he wasn't hit people.
Nobody was really accusing of Deion of going out there and wrecking guys on big hits. That was not his game.
But his distinction, I guess, would like Bo Jackson had it as being an all-star in both. He played the only guy to play in a World Series and in the Super Bowl,
which is pretty. And he's a Hall of Fame football player.
And he's a Hall of Fame football player, while Bo Jackson was neither.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sport. Might be a college football Hall of Famer, Bo Jackson, actually.
That's possible, but he was not a professional because he just didn't play long enough.
And then who else? Okay, so that's two of my top four we agree on.
So, okay, I have one that's a historical name that I purely know as a historical reference, though I could not tell you much what he did, which was Jim Thorpe.
Well, good, and it's good that you bring up Jim Thorpe. And so, what do you okay, if you had to just say, okay, what did I know about Jim Thorpe? I know he played baseball, obviously.
He played like everything, right? I know he did like track and field. He did the NFL. He did baseball. He was just like he was the Deion Sanders, Bo Jackson of his time, basically.
I don't even. You can't really compare because I'm pretty sure he was voted the greatest athlete of the first half of the 20th century. And why you kind of laugh?
That's such a weird distinction. Well,
except that the first half of the 20th century, very different professional sports wise than the second half. So Thorpe, because the Olympics was and he was he won the decathlon and the pentathlon when they had the pentathlon, and then played baseball and then played football and did it simultaneously, all while, really never getting paid very much. And there's all kinds of stories we're not going to get into about Jim Thorpe. That could be its own show. Yeah,
because didn't he get his medals stripped away at some point, but then they reinstated him?
Right. And just all kinds of prejudice. And this is an American, Native American, and he's the first guy to win a gold medal as a Native American for the United States. So, the special thing was that he did three things.
right?
Yeah,
He did 3, and he did them all at a very high level.
He wasn't a really good baseball player. He was a guy who was a really good athlete who
could just kind of play everything.
To hit the ball and could probably run around and catch the ball if he had to. But as far as his being a really effective and great baseball player, I think everybody wanted him to be. There was desire that, we want this guy to be, something, because professional baseball was way ahead of professional football at that time. So
that
his ability to make money and get paid would probably come higher in baseball had he been able to have more success.
Mm-hmm.
So good call on Jim Thorpe. And who else? Well, we mentioned the other guy briefly. Did you see him play? Brian Jordan?
Yes, I remember he had he was actually like a pretty good outfielder. I remember he had a couple seasons that were actually like, oh, wow, that guy could actually kind of play.
Right. So he was weighted the other way, I would say, maybe much like Bo Jackson, as primarily you thought, oh, he's a football player who plays baseball. No, he played 15 years in the major leagues, and he was an all-star. So and so that makes him different. He did make the Pro Bowl as an alternate in his last year, so that's pretty cool. And then he did football.
Yeah, but I feel like at the same time being selected as the alternate's not quite, Bo Jackson, where he was a starter in both, right?
Yeah, I don't think, I think,
and especially football Pro Bowl alternates are like,
he just, let's say he didn't have the impact, in pro football that he did in baseball.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
So, but again, I know. So those 4 guys, and I would say far and away outstrip, anybody else who tried to do both things.
I think everybody else, you kind of have guys that could have done both, and they've just ended up doing one. So you have this whole list of like Kyler Murray, right, Russell Wilson, like Tim Tebow technically, but I feel like saying that he was both a professional football player and a professional baseball player is technically the limit of what you can say about him.
Well, hold on a second then, because Tim Tebow is now a professional football player again. And isn't that just the weirdest thing? So the Mets finally let him go, and I don't know why it always has to end up being about the Mets. And the Mets took a lot of heat for bringing Tebow in, but
they never turned him into a sideshow. Yeah, at least at the major league level.
And as we often say on this podcast, the minor leagues is rife with 23 guys who are just there to play with the 2 guys you really are interested in on your team that can maybe go somewhere in your organization.
And he probably was not one of those 2 guys, but he helped bring in tickets. So
yeah. And what better guy do you want in the locker room for your young players? So I cut Tebow slack in that thing.
I don't have anything against Tim Tebow the person. He's just not. Right. Tim Tebow, the player, there's a lot left to be desired.
Yeah. Well, certainly. We'll see if he actually, because, he goes to back with Urban Meyer in Jacksonville, and he's going to play a position he never would play for anybody else. People told him when he came out of college, look, you're not going to be a quarterback. I only want to play quarterback. Yeah, well, that's why he played baseball. So,
probably will go down as the single worst quarterback to ever win a playoff game.
So we talked about Russell Wilson, and he never played at any kind of level other than fooling around with the idea that he would be drafted and he tried out.
Like a guy like Drew Henson, who was who took over for Brady at Michigan, but I always remember him. It was a whole big thing of would he be a baseball player or a football player? Surprise, he was kind of bad at both.
Who I would say kind of interesting. I knew him as a college player, as a football player, because going to USC, I followed Notre Dame, and Marja was a terrific.
This is who I was talking. He was a tight end, I thought. Oh, no, he was a wide receiver.
I think he was
the guy I was. He was because he went football. He went baseball and did baseball only. But he was the one guy that I'm like, I always wonder if he had tried football, how good would he have been? Because he was really good for those Notre Dame teams.
Killed USC. So
he was big and he could catch the ball, and he was a serviceable major league pitcher.
Oh, I'd say that's almost being a little harsh. This guy had probably a 10-year major league career. He pitched that long. I mean, check it out on Baseball Reference. But
I think he had a couple pretty good seasons, but he never had like a, oh wow, this guy kind of season, I feel like.
Right. But to make that decision, right? Because I thought he actually had a better chance at the time of being
a star. Yep. Yeah, he had a chance of being a star, but I think for a lot of guys, you're like, you know what? It's much easier for me to get my 10 years in baseball than it is to get my, whatever my service time is in football.
I just want you to know that since Marja is throwing to your old buddy Casali in San Francisco this year, but he's still. This is his 13th year in the major league. He's got a pension.
that just right there shows that it was right.
So I hand it to him. Guys in Notre Dame are probably smart, and Sis Marja would be one of those guys. So and there's a few others that you probably didn't watch him play, but DJ Dozier played with the Mets and was a fine college football player at Penn State. don't see it here in the notes, but I'm almost positive he went to Penn State. And running back, and played very well. But was not a great baseball player and most forgettable, guy in any other way. What I also didn't know is that your man Todd Helton was
the quarterback at Tennessee before. Unfortunately for him, I think he got an injury in like one of his last seasons there. And there was a freshman on the depth chart that year by the name of Peyton Manning. Didn't get his job back after that.
That took care. That's why Todd Helton ended up playing for the New Ravens and the Colorado Rockies,
and having a Hall of Fame. And this is where you get into a lot of guys that played both. They played professionally in baseball, and then they were a good college player in something.
Right,
right. Darren Erstad, I think, wasn't he like a punter or something?
He punted for the national champion Cornhuskers.
So
which I didn't know until I looked this stuff up.
I mean, so he won a World Series and a college football national championship. That's pretty cool.
And as we talked about in our 200 hits podcast, 240 hits in one season for Darren Erstad. I would wear that. Like, if I were him, I'd be running around with 240 all over my shirt.
I mean, he was all-star Gold Glover. He was a very good player.
So, very good player. But baseball, and you said it, I think, well before, you're right, like the seasons are concurrent in other sports, right? It's hard, other than baseball, football, which is, spring, fall for the most part. And there is some overlap. And I remember Sanders and Jackson would have decisions to make in September. And I'm pretty sure Bo Jackson played both baseball and football at the same time for a little while.
I always remember Dion would kind of disappear from baseball in September because it was football time.
I guess he wasn't that valuable to the baseball team. Because I said, see you later, I'm going to go play football now. We know what I am.
Or he was a lot more valuable to his football team.
So you mentioned Michael Jordan before, and we all say baseball is one of the most difficult things to do is to hit a baseball, and Michael Jordan certainly didn't do anything to dispel that notion at all. But, always gave Jordan a lot of credit for rolling it out there. I mean, he put himself, out in front of everybody and failed miserably at this.
Yes,
and I think that's pretty good for the greatest basketball player.
We will not get into any of the conspiracy theories surrounding Michael Jordan's baseball tenure and why he was possibly playing baseball. We just know it was not entirely because he was really, really good at it, though.
And the evidence would support that. Yes. But to go out there every day for a couple of seasons, right? He played for the Birmingham Barons, I remember. And anytime he had like a good week or something like that, like we're gonna bring him up, they're gonna bring him up, and it never happened.
No. But there was others. What's impressive about the basketball players is that the basketball players that played were actually really good. There's a lot of really good basketball players that ended up playing baseball either, in the minors or majors. Like Danny Ainge. I didn't know Danny Ainge before we started looking into this, played baseball for any amount of time.
Right.
I just knew him as the Celtics GM and that guy that was a pretty good three-point
That's so funny, right? Because, Ainge, by the way, was the kind of guy, by the way, if you were an opposing player, you just were looking to elbow. You wanted to hit him in the chops.
Yeah, he has that kind of look too.
Oh, he definitely was that way. You just wanted to smack him, and I'm sure he would probably laugh if you had that conversation with him. And he was not he was supposedly a talented baseball player who he couldn't hit. He couldn't hit, and he played 3 years in the major leagues. But really, had a 220 career batting average and went and played with the Celtics most notably and ended up being a GM and was a contributing player on championship NBA basketball.
He was also played on the Suns, right?
Yes, I think later in his career. I
remember he was on those early Suns teams.
Yeah.
He was on those early 90s Suns teams, and he was a part of those teams with Barkley. But then you even have a guy like Dave DeBusschere.
You're talking about, obviously, I'm an old time Knick fan, and DeBusschere, who has a lot of distinctions that you could. So talk about his pitching, but I'll mention something else that you probably don't know.
What?
So he was the player coach of the Pistons before he came to the Knicks.
So was he
at 24 years old?
At 24, he was player coach. That's weird.
Isn't that weird? And so you knew he was a baseball player when he came to the Knicks, but he had already stopped playing baseball by that time, several years. But
he was a Hall of Fame basketball player, which is wild that there's.
And so I'm going to guess in the early 60s when DeBusschere did both things, or at least for a little while, it was as much a monetary decision as any. You just didn't get paid enough in the professional sport. You could play two sports, you make more money. You did it if you could do it. And they
I don't see why
didn't conflict that much, right? Baseball and basketball really at that time did not
had
conflict
no
nearly
overlap.
much.
Yeah,
right, because you're basically only worried about the playoffs, and the playoffs, at that time were probably done in early May, so it was not a big deal to come to the baseball season a month later.
so any other basketball, baseball crossovers you think are interesting?
The only other interesting, Ron Reed is a name that Major League fans will know if you're of a certain age. He played probably in the 70s and 60s and 70s. He pitched 18 years in the major leagues, but he played 2 years in the NBA. Just playing in both sports.
The fact that you were able to play both sports professionally says something.
So, and Dick Groat won a National League MVP and still kicking it, 90 years old. Played one NBA season. I never saw him play, didn't know he was a basketball player, just sort of looking it up. And the last guy I'll mention is Chuck Connors. And I guess, okay, so you read that crazy book, right? The Strange But True Baseball Stories. And there's a story about Chuck Connors in this. So Chuck Connors.
Okay. Wait, wasn't he on TV?
Yeah, right. So he was playing for the Montreal Royals when Jackie Robinson was going through there. So you think about this, and he had played basketball two NBA seasons. He had played, but somehow he got a tryout for a part in some movie, and they cast him as something else. And he ended up going to Hollywood, and they thought he had an interesting face, and he ended up becoming the Rifleman and having a television and film career that's far superseded his.
The Rifleman was one of those like Western shows from like the 60s, 70s, right? And that went on for like forever.
In the 50s, actually. I think the Rifleman was the 50s.
I think. Yeah, I know, but I remember that show because it's like I see it on TV sometimes on like those old TV show networks, and it's just like season 16 or something.
But
like just apparently there were a ton of Rifleman episodes.
So he was a tall guy, obviously became a baseball player, and you can see him in old pictures in his basketball uniform and his baseball uniform, and then his cowboy hat. And Chuck Connors, just one of those weird guys who had an interesting life and was a better actor than he was an athlete in the long run, even though he played two pro sports. Hockey doesn't have a lot of guys.
It's just, I feel like it's just too hard. It's just such a punishing game.
Yeah. I
compared to just so many of the other ones.
I remember a player who was a heralded, baseball player came up and you knew he was a hockey player and he had to decide to play pro hockey or pro baseball. A guy named Richie Hebner, who had a nice MLB career. You can pull up his stats if you want. And Hebner was a third baseman. Ended up playing for the Mets later in his career. Most of his success was with the Pirates. And was a decent, baseball player. Not anywhere near an all-star, but a solid major leaguer.
So but still, the fact that he was even considered to be able to play both baseball and hockey is pretty unusual. Is there anybody else even?
You watch him pitch for the Mets and Tom Glavine.
Really?
Yeah, Tom Glavine. Tom Glavine got drafted, he likes to say, ahead of Luke Robitaille and Brett Hull, and those guys are in the Hall of Fame, he would say. So he could have been a Hall of Fame hockey player, but he laughed and says, no, that's not really the case. But he was taken 69th in the draft in 1984 for hockey. So,
that's
made the right decision.
Yeah, kind of a Hall of Fame pitcher.
Exactly. So, but no other real guys that I can think of. And that's mainly because I remember these guys played hockey. Because these days that's just not going to happen, right? The fact that guys like Kyler Murray can even flirt with it is pretty unusual.
Yeah, just the idea that this guy was a two-sport player in college is something to be impressed by now.
Exactly. And
so I guess what's interesting now is like, what are the chances anybody else does it going forward? And if somebody does it, what sport do you think it would be in?
Playing two sports.
Do you think we'll see another baseball football guy, another baseball basketball guy, or something new?
I don't know. I think the money makes it so difficult, and the ability to, be at that top level is even harder today. The competition comes from all around the world. I don't know that it could be done and will be done. Maybe a non-contact sport.
Yeah, I could see a baseball guy that's like, especially like a guy like McNeil, who, for people who don't know Jeff McNeil particularly well, is a under par handicap golfer, correct?
Right. He's a +1.9.
I think you had said something like that to me. He's like a +1, so like almost a +2. So it means he gets extra strokes when he goes golfing, which is nuts. But like, if all of a sudden one day he decided to stop playing baseball and he's like, I'm going to dedicate myself to golf, he's actually the type of guy that might be able to go pro in golf then at that point. And the thing is you could play a full Major League Baseball career and then at that point decide to try and pursue pro golf. Like, it's unlike all the other major sports, you wouldn't necessarily age out of it in the same way.
I agree with you, but I would think it would have to be on the PGA Tour and not necessarily like Rick Rhoden, and an effective major league pitcher for a lot of years for the Pirates and the Dodgers. One of the best golfers ever as a baseball player, and won, I believe, an event or two on the senior PGA Tour after his baseball career. I'd like to see somebody.
I feel like
do it
on the PGA.
Yeah, that is no, I don't want it to be McNeil because that means there's a reason he's not playing.
No. But that would make it more meaningful if they did it on the PGA Tour as opposed to the senior tour.
Yeah. So so you think it's golf too?
I think it's golf too, because the only issue with golf is the scheduling. It's the exact same as baseball, so I don't think you would ever see a two-sport guy because it would be too hard to do. But I could see somebody that finished, like if some guy that was, he played 6-7 seasons in the majors and then basically just retired because nobody was interested in signing him. I could see a guy like that then going on and moving over to pro golf.
Okay, I'll give you last thing here. So here's a guy who you think if he ever could figure out golf, he can't really play baseball much anymore. No one's signing him and all that stuff, but he hits the ball a mile. Maybe he's got touch. How about Cespedes?
Yeah, because isn't he like a crazy good golfer?
I think he plays golf, but you think he's a guy, okay, for whatever reason, he still hasn't lost his ability to swing. We know that, even though he can't really run anymore.
Right,
so
yeah.
That you don't need to run on a golf course. You just got to walk. So maybe a guy like that could do that.
Yeah, like it would be the kind of guy that it's just unusual that walking, I have a feeling that if he can't run and his legs are bothering that much, I can't imagine walking, 4 rounds of golf on a weekend for a tournament would be the best thing for a guy like him.
Yeah, but it's not running, so that's you don't have to. It's not dependent on you going in the corner and running. So, all right, well, I think we're not going to see we're not going to see it. I think you agree with me, but it's Bo Jackson has the crown as the guy who probably had the most impact in 2000.
And I think he will probably wear that for a very long time.
I think so too.
Thanks for listening. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite platform. And you can follow us on Twitter at Almost Coop.